Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we have the third official lumirank tier list. It's finally been posted. For anyone that doesn't know, they compile all of the players from the lumirank and they ask them to give them a tier list ranking characters on a scale of 1 to 10, and this is what we have, the final product. And I could just go over this like any other tier list and talk about what I agree and disagree with, but I'm gonna be real with you. I care. I don't really care that much. So instead, what we are going to be doing is we have, by the lovely Kenniky, and you can't see it right now, every single region and the differences between them and the characters that they value. And again, this is from Kenniky on Twitter. He went through the time of doing this, so his link will be down below. Be sure to follow him. He's the guy that made the translation stuff on Search.gg for the Japan name, so he's awesome. Be sure to follow him. But this is what we're going to be doing instead, because this is actually interesting. So let's get into it. And if enough people want me to talk about this tier list, then maybe I'll make another video on it. But to be honest, it's really boring. I just agree with most of it. But just let me know if y'all really want to see that. So the first thing that we're going to do is look for any major discrepancies with any of these regions. Just one character being placed way too high or way too low relative to the other regions. And we actually have one right away with the worst character in the game. Pretty much every single region having Ganon in his own tier, with Latam putting him in a tier with Little Mac. But Japan actually has Simon Belmont in a tier of his own as the worst character in the game. And they still have Ganon as the second worst character in the game, going in that D tier. So it's not like they think Ganon is good. They just think Simon is like really, really, really bad. And I'm not here trying to tell you that actually Simon Belmont's pretty good, because the character doesn't have a lot of potential. You have to work so hard in order to make his aerials work. If your spacing is immaculate, yeah, you can have a pretty disjointed aerial that gets value, but you also have a game plan which relies on you like standing still and throwing projectiles like a bot, which just, it's not good. Simon is not a good character, but is he the worst character in an E tier of his own? I mean, apparently Japan thinks so. And the Japan takes don't stop, because after Belmont is the worst character in the game, you have Marth as the third worst character in the game. And remember, this is just the top players for each region putting their input into this tier list. I'm just going to be saying Japan, North America, Europe, though. So I am generalizing, but these are just the top players, basically the smart ones for anyone interested. And Marth at third, so base. Actually, such a big fan of this, because Marth is just a bad character. Like, is he this bad? You know, probably not. I think any character with a sword is better than Villager and Dr. Mario for that matter, but I mean, I guess Ganon has a sword technically. Maybe I shouldn't speak too soon. But the thing about Marth is, like, yeah, he has Sour Spot confirms into Sweet Spot confirms, but every other character in the game just has, like, confirms that just work always, and you don't have to do this crazy gimmick and this extra micro spacing that doesn't even work half the time because the tipper is bad. Marth is a really bad character. He's not the third worst character in the game. Don't let them gaslight you like this. Like, every other tier list still has him in the C tier around there, but I really, really like that they just hate him, because I also hate him. And there's nothing else that was super interesting within the C and the D tier. Like, yeah, there was some discrepancies, like Piranha Plant was a little higher in Japan, but nothing that is, like, actually really interesting. But I do want to talk about Pichu, because Pichu is going to be a character that is in the C tier for LATAM and America, just generally in the middle of the C tier rated there. But for Europe and Japan, he's going to be in the B- tier and in the B+ tier for Japan even. So Europe and Japan putting more emphasis on this character, which isn't surprising at all. You have Nader, and Dryby in Europe obviously doing extremely well. Dryby on a massive uptick right now as well. You're going to have Yonpi having a lot of success in Japan, and even though he doesn't play it anymore, you had Nietono, there it is. You had Nietono, who was a very good Pichu player in Japan for a very long time, even though he plays Diddy now. There's always been a prevalent Pichu player in Japan, so this character never really fell out of people's mind, and I do think this is more of a realistic placement of where Pichu should be on a tier list. Yes, he is a glass cannon character, but he's also like a really hard-hitting glass cannon character, especially at this point in the meta. I'm kind of coming full circle, Pichu. Like, honestly, you can hit yourself as many times as you want to if you are killing them in that one interaction. As long as you can kill them in one hit before they kill you in one hit, I think you should be fine. And I do think that Pichu has the tools in neutral to do that. So I agree more so with Europe and Japan on this one, that Pichu should be higher, but interesting that he is. Actually, I lied to you. I have one more character to talk about in this B and C tier area, and that is going to be Donkey Kong, who for the most part was valued at the highest heavy, but for different kind of ranges of that. You're going to have Donkey Kong being very highly valued in Japan going in that B tier, which makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of very good DK players. You have Midano, you have Rarakusa, even though he's mainly Falco, no, he was still obviously very good. So a lot of good DK players in Japan. Makes sense that this character would be a little bit higher, and no other heavies making it into the B tier, just staying in the C+ tier. And for the most part, the heavies just stayed in the C tier for these lists. For Europe, you are going to have Donkey Kong as the highest heavy. He's only going to be in this C tier, though, so a little bit closer to the other heavies. You do have Bowser over Incineroar, though, which is interesting because in Japan, you have Incineroar over Bowser. Then you're going to go to Latam, where you actually have Donkey Kong as the worst heavy, which I think is really interesting. I don't agree. I think Latam is wrong on this one. As much as I really like seeing Bowser above Donkey Kong, it makes me happy, fills my heart with joy. I just think Donkey Kong is way too hard-hitting at this point in the meta. He's just got such amazing tools. And then you have Incineroar actually as the best heavy in the game pretty significantly over Bowser and DK, which I think makes sense considering the Incineroar players from the Latam region. And then in NA, you're going to have DK back to the highest heavy in the game, but he's still not going to be in that B tier area, in the C plus tier. And then you have Incineroar, and then you have Bowser. So I do agree, unfortunately, that Bowser is not the best heavy in the game anymore. I do think that title should go to Donkey Kong. I still think Bowser is better than Incineroar, though. I will die on that hill, but I think for the most part, DK being the best heavy in the game in a majority of regions is correctly reflected. But I do think it's really, really interesting that not only is he not the highest in Latam, but he's actually the lowest heavy in Latam. Also, before I get comments about it, I'm very aware that I'm just ignoring D and really when I say DK is the worst heavy. But when I'm thinking of the best heavy conversation, those characters aren't even included in it. So it's really just between the three of Bowser, DK, and Incineroar. And if you lose it, you're the worst heavy because the other ones are just bad. Another thing that I think is really interesting, but also makes a ton of sense, is where each region values the links. For not like actual Link, I don't really care about him, specifically Toon and Young Link. You're going to have Japan having Toon Link as the highest, which makes a ton of sense. You have Sigma and specifically level 1 over there crushing it. But for Europe, you're actually going to have Young Link being significantly the highest, with Toon Link being a lot lower. Makes a lot of sense. You have Super Semi over there. And then for Latin America, where you don't really have reps of either character, maybe you do in Latin America, actually. I'm sorry if you're a really good Toon Link player. Aang is actually pretty good. But back on point, you don't really have a ton of super high level reps crushing it with these characters right next to each other in Latin America, right next to each other in America as well. And I just find that honestly really, really cool and super interesting to see that you have a top rep from Europe doing really well with Young Link. There's the influence. The players in Europe are seeing this Young Link tech, and the players in Japan are seeing this Toon Link tech. I also think that on the most part, it's very interesting that Japan has just rated the links higher than the other regions have, all of them being in the B tier for the other regions, and then Japan having both of the links in the A tier. So maybe putting a little bit more value into like that projectile based meta. I do think that has more weight in Japan in general, but just interesting to see. And I want to make this statement right now so no one ever argues with me about it again, because I hate hearing it. It boils my blood. Every single region has Ryu above Ken, and most have them above him by a significant margin. Only Japan having them kind of close to each other. But every single region is going to be having Ryu above Ken. And it's because Ryu, and hear me out on this one, he's better. There's also a character in the B tier that everyone has given up on except for one region, and that's going to be Shulk. NA, he's going to be B tier. In Latam, he's going to be B-. In Europe, he is going to be B tier. But in Japan, he's actually going to be in the A+ tier. Not even in the A tier, but the A+ tier. So a lot of faith in this Shulk character to still find success in the meta, which I just think is so interesting. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. Shulk is one of those characters that I think you really can place anywhere, because at the end of the day, he's got a really, really big sword, and he's got speed art, and he's got buster art, and he's got smash art, and shield art. I always forget about shield art, even though it's the one that literally lets him escape combos. So he's a lethal character. If you can make him work, very good. The problem is no one makes him work, but there are good Shulk players in Japan. Like Komei is very good, Akio is very good, Kanaji whenever he travels is obviously amazing. So all of the Shulk talent that is like actually still getting good results, it feels like is in Japan. So again, it's not surprising that the Shulk is a lot higher in Japan, that they still actually have faith in this character, but I also think it's really funny to see that the rest of the world has just kind of given up on him. Also, I should quickly make the point that every region had Pit in B- except for Japan, which had Pit in A-. I'm not even going to talk about why that could be, though, because, come on. Another character with a really wide range is going to be Greninja, who's got a C+ tier in Latam, and then an A tier in Japan, with a B+ tier in Europe, and a B tier in America. And I don't think any of these are necessarily like right or wrong. I don't really have a concrete opinion on Greninja. I think he's a solid whiff punish character in a game with really, really, really good with punish characters. He doesn't have any get off me tools, but actually he does have get off me tools in like down tilt, and just running away is his main get off me tool. But if you are pressuring him, if you can get him stuck in his shield, he does get, unfortunately, really, really smothered in that aspect. So I don't think he's all the way towards the C+ here. I think he's probably more aligned with this Europe placement. I think this one is the most accurate. They also have Tarek, by the way, so maybe that coincides with it. But I think it's really interesting the wide range that Greninja has, and I'm curious what y'all think about it. Another character that is really highly rated by Japan, but not so much everyone else, is going to be Falco, being in the top of the A plus tier for Japan. While every other region, he's going to be somewhere in that B tier. For America and Europe, he's in the middle of the B tier, and then for Latin, he's going to be towards the top of the B plus tier. So putting more value into Falco, and I don't agree all the way that Falco should be this high, but I do think that he is somewhere in that A plus tier at the worst in this A tier. He just hits you so insanely hard. Falco has some of the highest damage output in the game, and he has so many different ways to start his combos at well. He can get a raw down air, he can get a falling up air, he can get a grab, he can get a down tilt. Of course, he can get an up tilt, he can get a side B. He just has so many different avenues where he can start a combo, and it's the exact same thing for his kill confirms as well. He's one of the better edge guarding characters in this game. He's got forward air, which lingers for a super long time, down air, which hits like an absolute truck. I think this Falco placement, again, makes a lot of sense from Japan. They have Masa, they have Matsunabe, they have Veracruz, so many amazing Falco players killing it over there. And I do think that this is more correct than the rest of the world. Still a little bit high, but good. These are small differences, but I still wanted to point them out for the differences between Mario and Luigi, because in NA, you have them both in A-, but Mario is going to be rated slightly higher. In Latin, you're actually going to have Mario in the S- tier, and he is going to be over Luigi. In Europe, you're going to have both of them in this A tier, but you're going to have Luigi over Mario, and then in Japan, you're going to have Luigi in this S- tier, and then a Mario in this A plus tier. So two regions are putting the plumbers into the S- tier, but different plumbers respectively in Mario and Luigi, which makes a ton of sense just based off the top reps of these respective regions. And I also just wanted to talk about how Luigi as a character has just risen on the tier list in this year, and I think that is largely due to Rare. He has just shown everyone what a massive threat this character can be. But there are other good Luigi players that are also doing really well right now. Like Navy does really well. Luigi just had that monster run at Genesis. Guy's been on an uptick, I think. So Luigi as a character has been doing a lot better in the meta, and at the top level especially, he has just been killing it. I think that is because he is just a damage output machine, kind of similar to Falco. He just has so many different ways that he can start a combo as well as end a combo starter, where he just has so much creative potential. You don't really know what he wants to go for, and the Luigi player knows exactly what he wants to go for. So for a character that is like, oh, he just wants to grab you all the time, he shouldn't be that hard to deal with in the neutral. It's actually really difficult to deal with these Luigi players in the neutral, because they are just going for these mix-up with these nairs, these forward airs. Like, it's just a really tricky character to deal with when the Luigi player knows how to fully exploit them, and I think you really start to see that in 2024. Another character that Japan has a little bit different than everyone else is going to be Cloud, but it's actually lower this time in contrast to higher. Pretty much every other region has Cloud as a borderline top 10 character, NA and Latin having him both in the S- tier. And then Europe tier list, it's just a little bit more stickler with their S tier, but he's still very close to the top 10, where Japan, he's not even like a top 20 character, I don't think. So obviously that is going to be a very big difference in value. And I am leaning more towards Japan here. I do think that he should be maybe a little bit higher, like a borderline top 10 character, maybe in that like 14 to 17 area, but this is definitely a little bit low. And it makes sense that other regions would have caught a lot higher, considering that Latin and NA, Spargo is terrorizing them. I don't know about Europe. I guess Spargo's terrorized them a couple times, but he's also terrorized Japan once or twice. They have held their own a lot better, though, to be fair. Maybe that 12-year-old kid in Japan is absolutely going to change everyone's mind with Cloud. I doubt it, though. I feel like this is just going to be a character not getting as much value, because, or maybe not as much value being put on them, rather, because they don't have to deal with this constant demon that is Spargo. But maybe it makes their tier list more accurate. Who knows? But back to Japan putting characters higher than every other region, because I actually just didn't even notice one until now. Hero is going to be really high in Japan, all the way nudged in this A plus tier, where every other region he's going to be somewhere in that B tier, in that B plus tier. And again, I feel like I'm sounding at a broken record here, but I agree with Japan, but not to the extent of how far Japan is going. I would have Hero actually at like the bottom of this A plus tier, and then I think they are absolutely cooking. Maybe top of A tier would make a little bit more sense, but I do think that Hero is a very good character. His normals are already pretty solid. I think those are undervalued, and his specials are crazy good. Not even talking about just like the down B, just like side B and neutral special, as specials are incredible. Up B as well as the get off me tool is super strong, and then the spells themselves are obviously ridiculous. I think Hero is absolutely an A tier character and should definitely be valued higher by the other regions. Come on, America, we had Beast Mode Paul, we know this character's good. And for the rest of this video, we're going to be talking about the nitty-gritty, the small discrepancies, which is the third best character in this region, which is the fourth best in this region, how many characters in the top here, just stuff like that. But there are still a couple of characters that are definitely outliers in certain regions. The first one is Olimar, who is not highly rated in NA, very highly rated in Lat 10, being in the S- tier. In the B tier in Olimar, super low down for Europe. And then he's borderline top 10 in Japan. And I want to say, Europe, I don't know if I really trust your guys' opinion on Olimar on this one. I'm not trying to be rude here, but I'm just, I don't know. You don't have the best history record there. I do think that this NA one is probably the closest representation of Olimar, where I would probably put him. Probably somewhere in this A- tier, though, because Olimar's damage output is insanely high. This character hits you like a truck, and that's not even talking about when Pikmin are attached to you. He can just hit you with a couple up smashes. You get hit by some Pikmin throws in neutral. All of a sudden, you're at 80%. You get back aired once you're dead, or you get blue up throw to your dead. He has so many ways to get the stock as well. He's got a shield breaker with purple Pikmin. If he just runs up to you and down smashes, your shield just actually explodes. This character is very strong. He definitely got some weaknesses, though. You can beat out the Pikmin. If you got some really nice disjoints, he's definitely going to struggle. He is a lightweight character, but he's also a very nimble character. He also has Whistle, which is so broken. Whistle is an insanely broken mechanic, and I think it makes a ton of sense that he's highly rated in Japan, because Shuton has been such a dominant force there. Obviously, he hasn't always played Olimar. There's other good Olimar players in Japan. There's a ton of them, but Shuton is obviously like the super high level top one. But recently, Shuton has been killing it again with Olimar. I'm not really sure why Latin values Olimar so high, and I'm also not really sure why NA doesn't value Olimar that high. I thought Olimar maybe would be a little bit higher, because there are a lot of good Olimar players in North America. So I do think that this one is probably the most realistic Olimar placement. I do agree, somewhere around this B+ tier, A- tier. And I do think Japan has him a little bit high. Same thing with Latin. But I can also see where they have faith in that character. It makes sense. And the final character that just isn't highly rated by every single region is going to be Pikachu. And he is going to be very highly rated in Latin. We'll get back to that. Highly rated in NA. Fairly highly rated in Europe. Actually, he's like borderline top 10 in Europe, so still highly rated. They're just sticklers with their system. And then in Japan, he is not going to be highly rated at all. Not even borderline top 20. He's going to be somewhere in this A tier. And we've talked about it a ton. There's no top representation for Japan in Pikachu. And I just fundamentally disagree with a character not being top 20 that can fully skip disadvantage state, as well as ledge trapping, because he can go under the stage and then has quick attack from ledge. So I just think because of those two reasons alone, borderline top 20 character, and then he also has everything else about him, which is really strong. Some of the best timeout in the game, blah, 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 blah. I could talk about it forever, and I have talked about it forever. Japan is just late to Pikachu. Trust me. Now we are going to be taking a look at these regions' top 5s and just looking at the discrepancies between them. Starting off with NA, you got Steve and Sonic tier their own. Absolutely agree with that. Then you're going to have Rob, Game & Watch, and Snake. You also have Pyra in this tier, which I think is fine, but just for this top 5, that's all we care about. Great top 5. Then for Latin, you're going to have Steve, Sonic, Game & Watch. Sonic in this tier with them, but still same order. Great. Pikachu in this top 5. Love that. Agree with that. Thrive with that. Rob at 5th. Again, great. And then Snake with these characters, which I also agree with. Latin, for this top 6, love this, because I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think there are a clear 6 characters in this game that are better than everyone else, and I think it's these 6 characters right here. I think this was actually my exact top 5 if you switch around Snake and Rob. So great job here, Latin. Then you're going to have Europe, Steve and Sonic tier their own. Great job. You're going to have Game & Watch, Rob, and Snake. Love this. Amazing. Japan, it's different. It's very different. You have Sonic as the best character in the game. You have Snake as the second best character in the game. You have Steve as the best in the game. Diddy Kong is 5th. And Kazuya is 4th. Now, Kazuya, we're not going to talk about him. I don't care about Kazuya. He kills you in one hit. If you think he's the best character in the game, if you think he's top 5, whatever, that's fine. He has literally an intangible option that kills you in one hit. The reason I don't think that is because look at all these other characters. They're also all killing you in one hit at this point in the game. Maybe 2 or 3 hits and their neutral isn't like actually horrible. That's why I don't value Kazuya. But also, you know, he kills you in one hit. It's really hard to argue against that. Diddy Kong being top 5, though, I think is so interesting. And I think Diddy Kong is a really strong character. I don't think he's a top 5 character. He just has too many actual matchups that are really bad for him against random characters. And normally matchups aren't something that I consider, but if you are a top 5 character, you need to have like a pretty much unconquerable matchup spread. You need to be super solid against pretty much everyone that you're facing up against. At least in my mind, that's what I think of as a top 5 character, and I just don't think that defines Diddy Kong as all. He's a very good character. He's got a lot of tricks about him, but he's also a character that can be easily exploited in a ton of ways. If you take Banana away from him, you become the better character. So I definitely don't agree with this Diddy Kong placement. This is a very good character. Maybe even could squeak into that top 10, but top 5, I definitely can't get behind that. I think the NA placement has him the best, which also is the region with Tweak, by the way. And Steve at 3 is... It's interesting. It's really interesting, because I can get the logic behind Sonic at 1. You know, he's the best character in the game because he loses no matchups. He's timeout god. You cannot hit him. He has amazing neutral, the best neutral, so he's number 1. I get that. but I don't get Snake at number 2. And I think here's my reasoning. Here's why I think this happened. I think the top players in Japan had to fight Aquila. They had to fight Aquila if they wanted to win a major. They had to beat this guy. So they got so good against Steve. So amazing against this character. And Steve, the one bad thing about him is he's very exploitative. You can get him without resources and he is just actually screwed. There is nothing that he can do. So I think because of that, people in Japan have gotten really, 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 really good at exploiting Steve versus a character like Snake, which is way, way harder to exploit and get really, really good against. There isn't like an answer, a flowchart that you can necessarily do against Snake, where I think there is one that you can do against Steve. And I also think Steve players allow themselves to be flowcharted more because they minecart, because they anvil. So I'm just trying to get in the mind of a Japanese player here. I've trained really hard against Ahola. Akola. I'm amazing at the Steve matchup. Snake is a lot harder of a character. He's got a lot, maybe not a hard character to train against, but he's a character with a lot more answers than Steve has in certain solutions. But I think in the process of, oh, Snake has more answers than Steve, so he's a better character than Steve, I think in that thought process, they kind of along the way lost the idea of, yeah, but Steve can jab you in one hit and kill you, and set up a block wall, and up tilt you in one hit and kill you with the nil combo. So I think this is like an overthinking from the Japanese community, putting Snake above Steve, but I wish I could speak Japanese and actually figure out why they have this, because it's just so interesting to see. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Hurt is, of course, tearing it up in Japan right now. And whenever he plays, he makes that character look the best in the game. He's got these crazy traps whenever you try to get near him. He's got anti-airs with both his tilts and his aerials because he's so quick with just a rising back air or a rising up air. He's confirming off of his projectiles that he's throwing at you. You got to look out for C4 as well. You can't catch him when he's in the disadvantage. Like, I get where Japan is coming from here, but also it's Steve, so not really. So with Japan having a couple abnormal characters in their top 5, that obviously means their top 5 is not going to align with everyone else. And the characters that they were missing are, of course, going to be Rob and Game & Watch, which made an appearance in every other top 5, and then Pikachu and Snake being the often substitute characters. So Japan's going to have the most unique top 5, and then after that, you probably have, honestly, Latin, just because they have Steve, Sonic, and Game & Watch in this SS tier. And this is how I used to see the game, honestly. Just after watching Mia play, I was like, oh my god, it's perfect advantage state. I think now I do think that Game & Watch is more in this S tier alongside Pikachu, Rob, and Snake, because I still think you can get perfect advantage state with Game & Watch. He still can't touch his shield. He's still really, really broken, but he is also a character that is paperweight. You can kill him in just one interaction. If you have decent disjoints, you can get the job done. I think he's got some like actual serious exploits like Snake, Rob, Pikachu also have versus Snake, Steve, and Sonic, where their problems are like, you know, they're 1% problem. And the final thing that I want to mention is just how many characters were in these respective S and A tiers for these regions. How highly do they value the top characters of Smash Ultimate? And for NA, you had 13 in S and 11 in A. For Latin, you had 18 in S, that's the most for any S, and 13 in A. You also had no middle A tier for Latin, so they either thought they were like close to the S tier or more so B tier. For Europe, it was the opposite. You had 9 in S and 16 in A, and no high or low A tiers, just straight up solid characters. There's no borderline anything. There's no borders in Europe. I should have remembered that. And then finally in Japan, you got 14 S and 27 characters in the A tier. And I actually think that this Japan tier list is probably the best reflection of the average, like, how good characters actually are. Maybe not like tier list itself, I'd have to actually think about that a little bit more, but I do think that most characters out of this game are at least A tier characters or S tier characters. You can absolutely make them work. They are viable. They are towards the higher end. And then which tier list I agree with the most overall, it's honestly really, really tough to say. I'll just go with the NA one, because you know, North America tried to... Actually, I'm going to go with Latin because they had Pikachu in 4th place. But for the most part, I think all these tier lists were really good. There wasn't, like, any crazy characters that I had major disagreements with. I think the only one that actually, like, genuinely caught me off guard was Simon as the worst character in the game. But this was honestly so cool to see. I think the regions that probably agreed with each other the most were Japan and Europe. Obviously, Japan was the most unique, but they're also the best, so those two probably coincide. Again, this was all done by Kenniky. His link will be down below. Please check him out. He does a lot of great work. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to sub. This one was a lot of fun to make. If there's anything I left out, got wrong, or if you want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub while you're down there, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.